Howdy, howdy, friends and neighbors. It's your old pal B coming to you from the jungles of Java. And as most of my regular viewers know, I have a penchant for talking with writers. And today I have somebody that I've been reading his Substack for quite a while. It's called the Apocalypse Prose. And earlier this year, he released a book called Broken English Teacher, Notes from Exile. It's available on Amazon, and it looks like you've got some retail outlets as well. And with that, let me introduce Ben Bartee, who is currently somewhere hiding in Mexico. Is that correct, Ben?
I'm in the jungles of Mexico. Yes.
Excellent. Well,
deep in the jungle.
Deep in the jungle. Yeah, that's the only way to go. Let's start off with the idea of being in exile. It's something very common with expats that they tend to escape rather than go to. Is that what brought you out of the States?
Definitely, yeah. And I do agree with that observation. I've met a lot of expats over the years, as expats do. You know, you kind of find each other.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I do think that most expats are running from something. Yeah. In my case, I think I would say that it wasn't clear to me exactly what I was running from. You know, the first time I went abroad was 12 years ago by now. So, you know, my mindset at the time is a little, you know, far in the past. I feel like I've changed a lot. So it's, you know, I don't remember exactly what I was like back then. But it had a lot to do. I guess it had a lot to do with a lot of things that could probably fill, you know, a psychologist's hour up pretty easily. Um, but a lot of it also had to do with my economic prospects. I graduated in 2010 with a degree in political science from like a mid-sized state university in Georgia, which is it was essentially economically useless. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I did it because I was interested in the subject matter. Um, but I mean, there were no jobs like waiting for me when I finished school. I had no plans whatsoever. I mean, most people who get political science degrees, I mean, the common thing is to go to law school. And I'm from a whole family. My whole family is lawyers. Like
Uh,
6 of my aunts and uncles are lawyers on each side. Um, but it just wasn't that interesting to me. And it was honestly, I was kind of lazy. It seemed like a lot of work to like study for the LSAT, and you know, the reading load is just like unreal.
Unreal. Yeah, yeah.
So, and I don't have a lot of respect for the profession of lawyerdom anyway. So I didn't basically. This is a long-winded way of saying I had no idea what I was doing with my life, and I knew I could get English teaching jobs easily with a college degree, which is still true today, although I don't teach anymore.
What with a political science degree, I guess most people would go into either academia or usually polling. Polling is one that seems to attract a lot of political science, poli sci graduates. You didn't have any interest in that kind of thing, demographics and opinions and.
No. Well, all right. I'm interested in politics. Obviously, I write it. That's like a large portion of what I write about at my Substack and elsewhere. But I don't really like the process of politicking. Um, or getting involved in politics per se, from like an electioneering standpoint. Um, I mean, I did an internship at the Lowndes County Democratic Party in South Georgia. That was part of my undergraduate study, and it was all right. But I mean, I'm not a politician. I don't have a lot of respect for politicians,
Yeah.
generally speaking. So,
Yeah, we agree on that for sure. Well, I know from reading your Substack, Apocalypse Prose, you have a very strong contrarian point of view. You like to look at issues from probably a non-standard point of view. Is that by choice, or is that just the way you see the world? Are you trying to be provocative,
uh,
in other words?
well, no, everything I write, I really mean. Um, no, it's just my worldview, I guess. Everything I write, I mean. I don't put a lot of like calculated thought into like what I write. Um, what I write obviously doesn't have a lot of commercial value. Um, from like an advert. I mean, I'm never gonna from from what I have out in my name already. I'm never gonna get a job with like the New York Times or CNN. It's just it's not. It's impossible. That ship's gone.
Yeah,
So I've accepted the fact that like my journalism is on the fringes, which is where I want to be anyway. Um, and lately I've been writing about the Israel Palestine thing. That's a whole rabbit hole we don't have to go down, but um, I've probably burned even more bridges with that, in terms of ever working for like mainstream media outlets. So it is what it is, and I don't have any. I wouldn't work for CNN or the New York Times or whatever. Name your standard publication. I wouldn't work for them anyway,
right.
so it doesn't really matter to me.
Well, how you've apparently had a very diverse experience in what the 12 years that you've been an expat. Uh, Tell us a little bit about where you've been and how that's affected your worldview.
Wow, that's a
It's a big
that's
question.
a
Yeah, I know.
big question. Well, the very first place that I went abroad to teach English was Saudi Arabia, of all places.
Wow.
Uh, it didn't last very long for reasons I explain in detail in my book. But it wasn't a Let's just say that me and Saudi Arabian culture are not compatible. Um, but what I will say is that all of the Saudis that I met, I mean, let me just say I'm aware of like the serious flaws in Saudi society, and I am by no means like a um, Islamic fundamentalist. I don't have a lot of like sympathy for that um,
Mm-hmm.
ideology, but all of the people that I met in Saudi Arabia, which were all men actually, because you're not allowed to talk to women. Um, they were all very, very nice. I mean, they obviously knew I was American, um, but they were very like hospitable and friendly, uh, which is not the image you would expect from, it's not what you would expect from Saudis, probably, if you just operated on assumptions like, that they're like fanatical religious people. So I
Mm-hmm.
would say that I've learned that, for sure, is that people are the same everywhere, kind of. That was kind of
Yeah.
what I appreciated about Anthony Bourdain's stuff, is that he had a way of, going to these places and just kind of like showing the mundane side of life. The common human experience. People
Hmm.
are a lot more similar than they are different, I think.
That's been my experience. I've lived in a number of countries and been to many, many more, and essentially people are the same. The culture around them changes radically, um, but it doesn't seem that individuals are too terribly wrapped up in anything but essentially surviving, you know, bringing home bacon and frying it up in a pan, basically.
Yeah, and most people aren't like most people don't put a lot of thought into like politics or global events or like
Hmm.
sociology or whatever. They're just like living their lives. So
Yeah.
um stuff gets weird when you get to the group level, and the society level. That's when like you get weird dynamics, but on like an individual level, people are people are just people mostly.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly been my experience as well. Uh, After Saudi Arabia, what happened? Where did you go?
Well, I was my visa was canceled by the governing authorities, and I was returned. This is a long story. I won't go into the reasons why. You can read about it in my book. Um, it involved some Klonopin that I was given by a British gentleman and a trip to a mosque to discuss 9/11. That's all I'll say about
Oh,
that.
Lord.
Um, yeah, not probably not the best idea that I've ever had, but I survived. I was not beheaded by the state. All they did is cancel my visa and sent me back to the U.S. So after that, I was back in the U.S. for a couple months or so, and then I took a job in Taiwan. So off to Taiwan I went. That lasted not very. I should I should say I used to drink quite heavily, which is not the greatest um,
Not
lifestyle
conducive
choice.
to social amenities.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So my Taiwan uh, bit didn't last very long. It was like 3 months or so. And then I had met an American guy who was from the same county as me, actually, um, in outside of Atlanta, which was strange because it was in the middle of the mountains. We were like two of the three foreigners in this whole town, and we were from the same county in Georgia.
That's bizarre.
And it is bizarre. Um, he told me that Thailand was pretty great. Um, so I was I got fired from this job, which I didn't like anyway, and I had a bunch of cash, so I went to Thailand. Things really went sideways in Thailand, where I discovered that you at the time you could still buy Xanax over the counter
Oh, yeah.
uh, in certain pharmacies. So that was a whole misfortunate uh, series of events that lasted several months. Um, and I ended up falling through a roof when I was high and drunk one night, and I broke my foot in several places. And I went to the doctor, and he was like my Pinrai, which is like Thai for like never mind, don't worry about it. That's what they say about everything. Uh, but I should have worried about it because when I went back to the U.S., like it wasn't really healing that well. When I went back to the U.S., the podiatrist I talked to was like, "You should have had surgery right after um, you fell, or after you broke it, because the bones are not aligned." But
Uh,
now they're by that time they were healed back, so there was nothing they can do. So to this day, the bones of my right foot are kind of. Thankfully, there's like I can still walk. Um, but I mean, you can feel them if you touch like the metatarsals, you can feel that the second and third are kind of
well,
wonky.
you kind of missed an opportunity because Thai surgeons are legendary. You could have had some of the best cutting in the world right there.
Yeah, I think they're a little better at plastic surgery than other forms.
Well,
But
that's
actually, the
probably
medical
true.
system in Thailand, the medical system in Thailand is actually not that bad. Um, just where I was in a village with poor people everywhere. Um, so it wasn't the best. But in Bangkok, they have actually pretty good medical facilities and surgeons and stuff.
Well, that's here in Indonesia. People with means generally go to Singapore or Thailand for any kind of surgical intervention. So yeah, it's got a good reputation, at least in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So you're starting to sound a little bit like the Hunter S. Thompson of English teachers. Um, what
That's
what ended
well,
up
thank you.
being? Yeah, you could do worse, believe me. Um, what ended up happening with the gig in Thailand? How long did you last there?
I lasted there probably about well, less than a year for sure. Probably 9 months or so. The first go round. So after the whole foot, they wouldn't let me work anymore because I couldn't walk around and like they want you to be like active. You know, it's more of like a teaching English in Asia is more like a performance than anything.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're teaching like younger kids, you're more of a circus clown than like a teacher.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, they wouldn't let me work because I couldn't walk. I had crutches and everything. Um, so I ran out of money. I had to go back to the U.S. That was in 2011, the end of 2011. And then I messed around in the U.S. for a long time, not really, um, not thriving for sure. Drinking
Yeah.
a lot, smoking a lot of weed. Um, it was not the best time of my life. Uh, and I did that for like 5 years. And then in 2016, I had a gig working for the federal government. And at the end of my contract, I got $1,000 bonus.
Mm.
I don't know what they called it, but it was basically like a end of service bonus. So I had some extra money in my pocket, and I just left and went back to Thailand and started all over again. But I had quit drinking by this point. I quit drinking in 2016. So my second trip to Asia was much less disastrous.
Well, that's good. So I assume at this point you haven't been in any foreign prisons though, huh?
No, not yet. Although I must say I've come close a couple of times. Much
Because
too
you
close
could
to
write the
not
sequel
very good.
to Midnight Express if that happens.
Yeah. Uh I mean it would be a story to tell. I don't know if it would be worth the misery, but no,
Well,
I'm glad
yeah, I
I'm
don't know.
glad I haven't ended up in any foreign prisons.
Well, every good story is not usually worth the misery, but it sure makes for a good story after. Um, the your book, Broken English Teacher, which I love the double entendre there. What does that cover in terms of your experience? Is that basically the Thailand experience, or does it go through the whole spectrum of your
Uh
teaching?
it, it goes through everything. Um yeah, everything starting with Saudi Arabia and then in Taiwan. I hit kind of like some highlights, but there's way more to it. Um, you know, that is in greater detail in the book. But yeah, it covers everything: Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, Thailand again, where I taught at a university for 3 years outside of Bangkok, and to Vietnam for a short time, and lots of places in between. Part of it's in Indonesia, um,
Were you
mostly
here
in
in Jakarta, or
Belitung. I don't know.
were you elsewhere
I
in
was in
India?
Jakarta for I was in Jakarta for a couple days, and I really liked it. It seemed like a lovely place.
Well,
Um,
you saw the wrong end of the country, though. You need to get out and see the backwoods. That's where all the fun is.
yeah,
Jakarta is
yeah.
just another big city. I mean, the world is full
I
of big
liked it though.
cities.
I like the vibe in Jakarta. I agree. I don't really like big cities in general, and they are kind of all the same. But
Hmm.
I don't know. I walked through some cool neighborhoods in Jakarta.
Yeah, well, there are some definitely interesting places here. But if I had my druthers, I'd be out of the big city. I'd be out in one of the small kampung. It's much more interesting out there.
I love Indonesia. The people were very nice.
Yeah.
Um, I'd like to go back sometime.
Well, contact me if you come around.
I will.
I'll give you a native guide. So let's see, we were 3 years at university in Thailand. Now you mentioned before we started recording that you've spent some time in Ukraine, which is interesting. I have a friend here who also worked in Ukraine for about a year. Very interesting place. What was your experience there?
Well, it was interesting. My wife is Ukrainian, actually. That's the reason I went there. We met. We met in Vietnam. We were both teaching English in Vietnam.
Uh,
That's the last place I've taught English. Um, so we met in Vietnam, and she moved back to Ukraine, and I just followed her there eventually. So I was there about a year. Ukraine's nice. Other people are very nice. Um, I really respect the people of Ukraine quite a lot. They've I don't think any people have known suffering quite like Ukrainians over the centuries.
yeah, it's well, I'm sure you know better than I do, but it's been a hot spot in Europe for 500-600 years
Oh,
more.
wave after wave after wave of invasion and war, just endless invasion and war. Um, yeah, and this you can really feel it on their character. You know, they have like a very they can be very cynical about things in general, but they have like a very admirable kind of like gallows humor. Like
Hmm.
they're very resilient. You can just kind of feel it on them. You know, like in the national character. I don't know if it's inherited like epigenetically or what, but they you can just they're just very resilient. They have like a peculiar way of looking at the world that you don't really get a lot of other places. They can come off as kind of unfriendly in some circumstances, but it's just their I don't know. I don't know how to quite describe
Yeah,
the character.
well, my impression is that the Ukrainians are similar to the Russians in that there's a very strong dark side that they don't often show, but that it kind of informs their character in general. Um, and I'm sure a lot of that comes from just constant upheaval, either
Yeah.
internal or external. They've gone through both of them. Were you there
Yeah.
at any point during the current situation?
No, we left in September of 2021 and
Uh,
we went to Georgia, the country Georgia, which is just a hop and a skip across the Black Sea from
mm-hmm.
Ukraine. So we were there when the invasion kicked off, and Yeah, it's pretty rough for my wife.
I can
She,
imagine. I can imagine. Yeah, especially having friends and family, close ties to your native country and watching this kind of situation going on. I try to imagine what it would be like if, well, I mean, I'm from Texas, so we've essentially got the same problem now. But you seem to keep hopping into some fairly interesting hot zones. What is that, by choice, or is it just simply the universe keeps sending you to these interesting places?
I, it's it's not by choice, really. I mean, the reason I went to Ukraine is because I met my. She wasn't my wife, obviously, when I met her, but I met her in Vietnam. I Ukraine would not have been at the top of my list of places to visit
Mm-hmm.
or to live. Um, so that's just the way. It's just the way it worked out. I mean, I love Ukraine. Ukraine's lovely, but the winter is like brutal.
Brutal, yeah.
I don't. I'm not like a winter person, and it's like 9 months of winter basically. It's really rough.
Well, that would explain why you're in Mexico now. You're getting plenty of warmth down there, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. No winter here.
Yeah, in fact, I haven't experienced a winter in 13 years now, so I don't even remember what it's like. Um, what
Yeah, yeah.
what has brought you to Mexico? Is another one of your universes thrown you into an interesting situation, or?
I don't really have a good reason for why we came to Mexico. Um, Part of the attraction was that I was under the impression. Can you hear me still?
Yeah.
I was under the impression that uh, Mexico was free of all the COVID BS. So that was part of the reason that I was attracted. It turns out that uh, that's not entirely accurate. Like they never shut the borders down, which is what most people talk about when they talk about Mexico being free. But within Mexico, in some states, they were like really brutal with the lockdowns. Um, and still, people here they wear masks everywhere. Um, there's hand sanitizer, which I hate everywhere. Um, so I guess I should have done more research on that. Um, but to answer your question, I don't know why we came to Mexico. Uh, just seemed like something to do. At some point, we're gonna go to Peru and Colombia, I guess. See what's down there.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah,
that's on my bucket list. I've only been to Ecuador, and that was many years ago, but um, I would love to go down there. There's so much I want to see. I'm somebody that's into antiquities, so I love going to places like Gaza, or not Gaza, but Giza, and of course here
I
in
want to go to
Java.
Gaza.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother story. But I love going to ancient places. So South America is absolutely chock full of them. I've been through Yucatan and Belize and Guatemala, looking at the Mayans ruins. Have you
Yeah,
have you had a chance to do any of that yet?
yeah. I lived in the Yucatan for like 6 months.
Hmm.
Right by Merida,
Oh,
just
wow.
north
Okay.
of Merida. Um, so yeah, I went to several Mayan ruins, including Chichen Itza. But in my opinion, there are better ones than that because you can't climb on the structures or anything, and there's like 1,000 tourists, and there's people selling you stuff everywhere. But
Hmm.
you can go to like there are much lesser known ones where there's no one basically, and like there's no one trying to sell you anything, and you can just walk on whatever you want. It's pretty cool.
Well, if you get a chance to go down to Guatemala, definitely check out Tikal is okay, but it's a lot like Mexico in terms of tourism. But Zinantonich and Dos Pilas are incredible, and my experience was that they were empty. But I love that kind of um, experience of feeling something that old. Um, what I mean, you chose the name Apocalypse Prose.
It's
Um,
Armageddon,
oh, I'm
actually.
sorry, Armageddon Prose. Yeah. Um, why? What? That seems to have fairly negative connotations. Are you pessimistic about world situation? I mean, you've obviously had a lot of experience with the world. Does that tend to give you a downbeat view of everything?
I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking when I came up with Armageddon Pros. It was a long time ago that I came up with this name, like maybe 10 years ago,
Mm,
before I really wrote that much. I, I, I thought of it for some reason, and I don't know why. I
it
just like
sounded
the way
good.
it sounds. Yeah, it just sounded right to me. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't say I have like an optimistic worldview. uh, I don't know that we've ever been closer to nuclear war than we are right now.
Yeah,
Maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis, um, but yeah, like if I was betting on the future of humanity, I would bet uh, apocalyptic doom sometime in the next century.
probably. I haven't seen anybody going for the duck and cover, which I did when I was a kid. Um, so to me, nuclear war is pretty real, at least at one point. Um, but in terms of the future, do you see the world going into complete tyranny, or do you see at some point that whole thing collapsing and people all of a sudden finding out that freedom is pretty great? What is your experience worldwide?
Well, I would hope it would be the latter,
Mm,
um, but I think I know too much to really be optimistic. You know, I mean, I don't know how deep you want to go down the rabbit hole, but
deep as you want to go.
there's a there's a cabal of very ultra wealthy, power hungry sociopaths that would like very much to institute a global technocracy that they would run, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
The epicenter of this is the World Economic Forum, and whatever shadowy interests are behind that. You know, it's not like the WF isn't the end all be all, but it's sort of the hub from which all the tentacles
I would call
expand.
it the center of the public relations effort, and
Yeah,
then a lot of NGOs that do the boots on the ground stuff.
yeah,
That's my
yeah,
impression of it.
yeah.
Um,
So yeah,
the reason I'm pessimistic or at least paranoid, I think is a good way to live. Um, the Lima Declaration of 1975, the United Nations basically laid out exactly what we're seeing now, down to declaring that they wanted the developing world, aka the third world, aka um, the global south now is the new term. Um, they said they wanted growth rates of 8%. We saw it. They wanted the world to be industrialized. We saw it. Um, so to me, there is definitely somebody that has a plan and that they are able to carry it out by whatever means they're using. Because what I see here in Indonesia is these NGOs come in and essentially dictate policy and law. They hand them a pile of paper and say, pass this. And I don't know if you've seen that in other countries or if you've been aware of it, but these NGOs get all up in everything and essentially run the show. And to me, corporatism is fascism. That's Benito Mussolini said that. Yeah. So, having corporations of any kind running the show is fascism. Are you experiencing that in other places?
I don't know if I would say I experienced it directly. As an expat, you're kind of like permanently on the outside of society. So I don't know how much like intimate knowledge I have with this sort of corporatist machine, or maybe I'm just not aware of it. But yeah, I mean that's how they do it. They do a lot of their dirty work through NGOs, and then of course they tie funding. They tie international aid to the adoption of whatever policies they're pushing. So there's like teeth behind it. And of course, if you get a little too uppity, there's always the chance you'll get invaded and displaced, like Saddam Hussein, or Gaddafi was trying to create a Central African, or a Pan-African currency, from what I understand, that would have potentially replaced the dollar, and other things he was doing that weren't on the agenda of Hillary Clinton and people like that. So, if you try to do stuff in the national interest of your people and you're in a developing country, you might not live very long.
Well, and my impression has been that the part of the reason the Russians have been so demonized is the fact that for at least 10 years now, they've been slowly processing themselves out of the dollar, out of the SWIFT system, out of the central bank system. And for that reason, they went from the mid 90s, they went from, our best buddies when the oligarchs were running the thing to now they're the global head of the Hydra. To me, the pattern is fairly obvious. But in your experience in other countries, do you think other people see that? Other cultures see that?
No, I mean, going back to what we were talking about earlier, I don't think most people really pay attention that closely. they just live their lives, and I think that's true almost everywhere. No, I don't think most people are aware of the forces that shape their life outside of like what's immediately obvious to them. Because if they did, maybe some stuff would change.
That probably instantly, I think, if people really were aware. What, in your opinion, what would change that? What would get people to be more aware of what's going on? I think right now it's hard to get people to read anything, so we can pretty much give up on that.
Pain, more pain.
Mm-mm.
I mean, like life is very materially comfortable for a lot of people in the West, especially, but even in the developing world, you can be poor but still be fairly comfortable. So I don't know that you're gonna see like a real awakening or interest in things like the budding technocracy until some real pain kicks in.
Well, that's really what I saw here. Indonesia had fairly strict lockdowns, mandatory vaccines, and people essentially just went along with it. There's no history of questioning authority or individualism anywhere in Asia that I can find. So as a consequence, people just simply line up and do whatever they're told to do. There still seems to be a vestige of it in the States, but it apparently is atrophying. You've been there more than I have in the past 15 years. Do you see that in the States, that people are just finally just giving up and doing whatever they're told?
Oh, well, it's so hard to talk in generalities, because America is like 350 million people.
Yeah.
And you have such vast differences, like culturally and politically, from San Francisco, from like Berkeley, you compare that to like Little Rock, Arkansas. I don't know, you are right about the individualism versus collectivism problem. I was in Vietnam during the lockdowns, and it was pretty much the same. Yeah, they don't question authority. They trust their governments much more. They just trust authority in general much more than in the West, which in my opinion is like some of the best legacy of the West is skepticism of power, of state power in particular. And I would like to see, like, I would like to be able to say, that, people are waking up and rising up. And that's true, of course, in some segment of the population. The question is, like, how big is the subset of people, and is it enough to really make a difference?
Yeah, in my experience, the people that start off are usually very lonely, and if they start showing some progress, get a few wins under their belt, other people tend to join in. But it's very interesting here in Indonesia. I compare large groups of Indonesians to a flock of birds. You can sit at the mall and you watch a group of people, unrelated people, walking more or less together, and one at the front will turn and they all turn in unison. And it's just an unbelievable phenomenon. I can't imagine that mindset, that kind of collectivism. But to me, I guess that one of the advantages of being an expat is that it gives you this objective view of everything, not only where you are, but also things like your home country, because you're not steeped in the media at that point. Most of what I consume is written, so I'm not watching television. I don't listen to all the water cooler talk. What I'm seeing is strictly written, and I get a much more dispassionate view of what's going on. And of course, you look at me and you notice that I will never assimilate into any Asian culture. I just don't fit. I'm everything that Asians are not. So I'm perforce objective about where I am and what I see in my home nation. Do you have that same impression or that same feeling that you have kind of a 30,000 foot view of everything?
Yeah, um, yeah, I mean, your vantage point is so much different when you're an expat. You know, you're looking in from the outside, uh, and you also get insight into your home culture. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have this contrast. You know, it's like the fish doesn't know what water is. You know, because it's surrounded by water. Um, yeah, I think people take their culture for granted. Um, you know, if they haven't traveled outside like that, this is just the way life is. This is the way society functions. And then you go somewhere like as foreign as East Asia, and you realize like it's nothing's cemented in stone. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
culture is totally it rises up from uh, centuries of social tradition, and
Mm-hmm.
it's fluid. You know, it's not fixed.
Yeah, in fact, generally here, most people are unaffected by events in the U.S. And if you talk or listen to anything out of the U.S., they think that everything that happens there uh, affects the entire world. But really, people just don't care. Occasionally, I get a question about what do I think of Trump or Biden or this or that. But beyond that, people, they don't even go to McDonald's here. It's just the U.S. culture is so far removed from anything in daily life here.
Yeah. Although I think American culture is, because it's so heavily exported around the world, like American pop culture, I do think it's held in kind of high regard. Um, you know, the mainstream pop culture, like in Thailand back in the day, they used to love Justin Bieber. That was all I ever heard about was Justin
Yeah,
Bieber.
that's true. That's true. And Lady Gaga and all the rest of it. But they,
Yeah.
they seem to be more or less passing fads. I think Bieber's had a much longer run in the States than he has here.
Yeah, I'm sure he's not popular. I don't know. I don't even know myself who's popular in pop culture because I don't care. But I'm sure that it's someone else now. Yeah. They also, I mean, they don't just love American pop culture. They love Korean pop culture.
Oh, K-pop
They
is
like Japanese.
absolutely
They,
huge here.
they go wild for it. I don't
Yeah,
get it, but
unbelievable. And I look at it and I go, what?
it's awful. It's
It's
terrible.
terrible. It's the most god awful thing I've ever seen. But using this as a bridge into pop culture as a whole, what have you noticed about American pop culture in the past 5 years? What is your impression of what's going on?
I think it's kind of like Sodom and Gomorrah. I think it's kind of like the last days of the Roman Empire when Caligula's marrying his horse and stuff. I think it's degenerating rapidly,
Mm-hmm.
and something better will probably be born out of the ashes. But I think it's on the downward slope for now.
So you essentially the existing pop culture you see as kind of an overlay on a larger uh, scale of pop culture, and that is kind of rotting from the inside, and eventually something new will bubble up. Is that how
Yeah,
you view it?
I think it's a function of the American Empire overextending itself, getting decadent. This happens with every empire. It
Mm-hmm.
happened with the Roman Empire. You know, it started off as a republic, and there were some real like virtues that people stuck to. They weren't marrying their horses, for example, and over time it became decadent. The ruling class got more and more depraved and decadent. and it
Mm-hmm.
kind of filtered down into society from there. And eventually it collapsed under its own weight, and the barbarians came over the wall, and that was that. So I think that's that's what's happening. I think pop culture is just like a reflection of that.
Well, the thing I've been watching, when I first came to Indonesia, of course, everything in Asia is corrupt. All the systems are corrupt. Government, everything is corrupt here. Um, and they always held up the U.S. as a paragon of virtue by comparison. And I can't defend that concept anymore because I'm watching the judicial system implode. Clearly the politicians are all on the take. I don't see any difference from the U.S. to any other country, really. Name one in terms of corruption, and I think we're as bad or worse than they are.
Well, it's just more systematized and official in the U.S. The corruption. All the Congress swamp creatures, they're all bought hacks, paid for prostitutes. Uh, they maintain some kind of respectable facade because the media, the corporate state media, continues to pretend like they're not degenerate prostitutes.
Right.
But it's just much more like camouflaged in the auspices of like respectable statesmanship. You know, they're all bought and paid for, but all of their bribes are legal. Um, you know, it's systematized corruption.
Yeah, and I guess that's what my impression has been is that the U.S. has been very good at making everything look legit. There's a famous anecdote here where a couple were getting divorced, and the judge came down on the side of the wife, and the husband burst out and said, "I paid you 100 million rupiah." And the judge looked at him and said, "Yeah, but she paid me more." So it's here it's fairly open in that sense, but the U.S. has always put this sheen of respectability all over everything, and I think that sheen is gone. I think
Yeah.
it's
Well, it's fading fast for sure.
fading fast. Yeah, I think there's still
I
some.
think a good. I think a good. Here's a good example. Like, if you get pulled over on a motorbike in Indonesia, or actually Vietnam was not very corrupt at all, in my experience. But like, definitely in Thailand, it's like the like the top dog for corruption. If you get pulled over by a cop on a motorbike and you're not wearing a helmet or whatever, you give them like 200 baht, like 10, 300 baht, $10 or whatever, and you go on your merry way. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like kind of a cheap. It's not that expensive, you know. Whatever. It's you go on with your day, like $10 isn't the end of the world. And so that's kind of like informal corruption. Everyone knows it happens, but it's like on an ad hoc basis. It's kind of up to the whim of whatever corrupt cop is messing with you. Like, it matters if you're a local or if you're a, you know, whatever. It's like it's an informal thing. But you know, in the US what they do is they say that they suspect that your car is like the you purchased it with drug money or something, and they impound
Mm-hmm.
it and they confiscate it. It's called civil asset forfeiture. It's theft sanctioned by the state. It's theft, but it's official. It has a fancy title. Lawyers have signed off on it. Um, so that's like a good example, I think, of how the corruption is like in the U.S. It's like systematic and official, and in other places it's like more informal.
Yeah, yeah, same here. In fact, they have a name for it. It's called Wang Rokok, cigarette money. and you just hand it to the cop. It's usually about $2 for locals and $5 for foreigners, and off you go. And the thing is if you tell them, I want a ticket, I want to go to court and handle this the right way, that's even worse. So it's better you just pay them off and go.
Yeah. Yeah. In some
But
ways, it's better for everyone.
yeah, I think in that respect, yeah, it works out to everybody's benefit in the long run. Um, but it's just interesting to make that juxtaposition of systems, with one being corrupt and obviously corrupt, and the other being corrupt and having the image of being legit. Um, but anyway, I've kept you for an hour, and I don't want to hold you up too long, but I want to get some final thoughts from you, and then ask you to tell us where to find your work. Um, if you could um, sum up in a phrase or a couple of phrases about where you go with your writing, what can people? I know you have a wicked sense of humor in your writing. Um, where can people find it, and maybe tell us a little bit about, do you have a goal, a vision for overall writing, or are you kind of scattered? I'm very scattered in my stuff, but um, some people have a definite vision for what they're doing.
Well, the first part is easier, where to find my stuff. Armageddon Prose. That's, in case Armageddon is a complicated word. ARMAGEDDN Prose, PROSE .substack. Main thing. So you can all my stuff free, so you don't have to pay me anything. Although if you want to, that would be great. I just I like telling the truth about stuff that you're not allowed to tell the truth about in
Mm-hmm.
the mainstream media, uh, whatever that is. COVID-19. My main thing when I first started writing was all the COVID-19, exposing all the COVID-19 lies. Um, Anthony Fauci should be under a jail right now, in my view. So I'm not going to stop writing about him until he's dead, or until he's in prison. And
Mm.
I might keep writing about him after he's dead anyway, because he's a hideous figure. Um, he's perhaps done more damage to people's lives than any single individual in world history. I know that's like a hyperbolic claim, but I think it's true.
Yeah, I
I think
think it
he's
can be
evil.
backed up. Sure.
He represents everything that's wrong with the world. Um, anyway, I don't. We don't have to go down an Anthony Fauci tangent, but that's how I started. Was like the COVID-19 stuff. I was locked down in Vietnam, and the schools were all closed, so I just started writing. And obviously, COVID-19 was like in the news, and that was back in the day when you weren't allowed to say it came out of a lab. That was racist. That was a racist claim to make. I got my Medium account suspended. Patreon threatened to suspend me until I took down all my COVID-19 stuff. My Facebook account was permanently deleted.
Yeah.
So I went through the ringer um, with that. Uh, and I'm very skeptical of the climate change scam. I'm actually an environmentalist. I think there are real problems with the environment, but I think the climate change stuff around carbon control is a social control scheme, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, humans are made. Carbon is like an essential element to life.
Mm-hmm.
So I go down that rabbit hole a lot. And basically, any narrative that's advanced in the mainstream media or by governments, it's all bad for you, and that's what I write about.
That's the
So
George Carlin bit. It's all
anyway,
bad.
people should check out my Substack.
Well,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about when I said that. My grandpa put me on the George Carlin when I was just a young boy, and I would say he's been a major influence on me.
well, that would
for sure.
explain why your head is screwed on right. But I really appreciate your time, and I'd like to recommend your stuff. I've enjoyed reading it. Even before I knew about your book, I was seeing your column posted on Zero Hedge on a regular basis. Um, in fact, there's one up today, as a matter of fact. So I do highly recommend people click over and take a look. Your writing is very clear, much better than mine, and organized, much better than mine. But
I should say I write much better than I talk.
well,
You know,
I think that's true of all writers. I'm a lousy speaker, but I think I write a mean piece of prose on occasion. But
anyway,
stick with me
for
for a second after we
kind
stop
words.
here, and we'll say formal goodbyes. But I would like to thank you for your time and wish you bon voyage, happy trails wherever you end up.